Welcome back to Understanding Greek with Jacob Kasule. We are still going through the alphabet, and this is lesson 3. And I hope if you were here that you've already watched lesson 1 and lesson 2. In lesson 1, we gave the introduction to the Koine Greek and the first 5 letters of the alphabet, which was alpha, beta, gamma, delta, and epsilon. And in the second lesson, we went through the next 5, which was zeta, and as you can see, eta, theta, iota, and kappa. And you had at least an assignment at the end of it, which was to practice pronouncing each of these letters, to practice writing these letters as well, both knowing how to write it in the small letters, what we call the lowercase, and in the capital letters, what we call the uppercase. And so we continue and pick on from there, and so we will get into the next at least 5 or so letters of the Greek alphabet. And as we have been doing before, we get to see the name of this letter, how it's written in the uppercase, how it's written in the lowercase, and the English equivalent. So the UC is for uppercase, lowercase lc, the EE is for English equivalent. And so our next letter onto that is lambda. Lambda, right? Now, lambda, when you're writing the uppercase, remember how we said we write delta? We said delta, you do a triangle completely. So think of doing that for lambda, but then this base here, you don't close it. All right. So think of if you were writing a delta or a triangular shape, but you're not covering the last bit. Or think of it if you were doing alpha, uppercase, or the capital letter A, right? So alpha, you'd write that and then do the crossing in the middle for alpha or A. So think of doing that, just that, without the bar or the cut in the middle. That is lambda. Of course, in the uppercase, you'd have kind of like a stand onto it. Right? So you see, so you're writing, think of writing an English A or alpha, capital letter, but then not don't cut that. Or think of doing delta, but then don't cross the base. Think of doing a triangle, but only the standing side and not crossing the base. So that is how you write lambda. Right? So that is lambda in the uppercase. So let's do it. So lambda, right? And like I've said, you'd probably have a base to that, and you are writing and using a pen, an ink pen. This is probably going to look slightly better, but think of something like that. So that is uppercase lambda. Right now, the lowercase lambda, at least again, you probably remember this for those of you who did sciences, physics, at least, for example, in math. And so think of you doing like a slanting stick, okay? But then instead of leaving it like that in a way that it can fall, give it a leg. Give it a leg, right? So a slanting stick, give it a leg. A slanting stick, give it a leg. A slanting stick, give it a leg. So that is lambda lowercase, or what we call the small letter of lambda. So a slanting stick, give it a leg. Of course, this part doesn't appear, right? So do it again. I hope you are able to practice this as well. Right, so that is the uppercase and the lowercase. Uppercase, lowercase. And this is the English equivalent of what we call the English letter L, where you'd get, for example, think of the word lamb if you were writing an L. The Next letter into the Greek alphabet is mu. Mu. Now, mu, the uppercase, is exactly like the uppercase or capital letter M. That's how mu is written, the actual capital letter M. Now the difference in with this, the lowercase is slightly different. So in the lowercase, think of if you were writing the English letter U, right, the small letter, but then this has a base on the left side and it's protruding, going underneath. So that is how mu is. But when we're writing, we begin with this tail. So up, and then you do that part which is like a U. That is how mu is written in the lower case. So let's write it now. So you begin with the tail, and then you do the U, what looks like a U. With the tail, and then what looks like a U. All right. So that is our next letter. So that is mu, the tail, and the letter. Now, the English equivalent is what would call the letter M. So you notice how the uppercase in Greek and the English equivalent is very close and very similar to each other. The next letter in the alphabet is nu. Nu. And the uppercase is very simple, just like the English letter N. Now, the lowercase is very different. It can be easily mistaken for the English letter V. So, when you find something like that in Greek, that is not V. I know in the English alphabet, when we see something like this, immediately the V, the V sound comes into our mind because it looks like a V. But in Greek does not have that letter that's equivalent to what we know as V. So when you find this is not a V. It's a nu, and it's the English equivalent to the letter N. All right. So the way it's written, so on the left side, it's more of a straight shape like you're writing a V, and then the right side is slightly curved a little bit. Straight and slightly curved a little bit. Straight, slightly curved a little bit. So that is nu. English equivalent is N. All right. So nu, English equivalent N. So the English equivalent to it is N. All right. So that is nu. Our next letter, this is, remember when we wrote zeta, we said zeta was one of the most complex of all. I hope you've been practicing your letter, zeta. Now, this next one is also complicated a little bit. At least it'll take a lot more practice than the rest of these letters, because that is T. That's that letter. Now, the uppercase and the lowercase are completely different, and the English equivalent completely different. So the uppercase for T is, so think of think of if you were writing an English E, okay, right, the uppercase, right? But then get rid of this side of the letter, the left side, so that you're left with that, this, and that. All right. So think of that. This is the uppercase for this letter. Of course, in the if you're looking at the printed script, it'll have like a kind of at least an age on each of this corner. But think of something like that. So this is, so when you find this, it is T. X. Now the uppercase is this. The lowercase is completely different. So think of you know how some people when they're writing, at least in the not the print but handwritten E uppercase, they write it like this, right? Think of writing something like that, but then at the end here would have a curve like that, of course joined, and here starts from somewhere like that. Okay, so think of first like that, and then you're writing that, and then writing that, and then that curve. That is the small letter. So the difference, however, is that this upper part will be slightly smaller than this next part. So that means, for example, after that, so it's smaller, and then it's bigger, and then the curve underneath. That is the lower case, and the English equivalent for this is actually that letter, what we call the X letter. So you notice how it's completely the lowercase is different from the uppercase, but it's also different from the English equivalent, how it's written. So this is why I said that we need to take enough time to practice this letter. All right. So now that we've seen and practiced a little bit how it's written, let us now put it in the order in the place it's supposed to be. Right. So the uppercase, we said, having something like that, that, and something like that. Because let me actually correct the base so that it's same size. So that is the uppercase. The lowercase, we say it is something like this, bigger, and then the curve underneath. And we say it is equivalent to the English letter X. All right. So that is our the next letter. So far we have covered lambda, mu, nu, tsi, like ts. Think of the ts, the X sound needs to come. And the next letter, which is very easy, is Omicron. Omicron. Now, Omicron is very easy. The uppercase is, think of the big O. The lowercase, think of the small o. Forgive my O. Has to be a complete, nice, rounded circle. That's close enough. And the English equivalent is the O. So that one is very easy. So Omicron, small the O sound. Now, this is very important to get this because when we come to the last letter, omega, it's also O. But we're going to talk about the difference in how Omicron and omega is used. Just like remember when we looked at epsilon and eta, that both of them are share the English equivalent E, but how it's written and how it's used is different. Remember, said, for example, epsilon, when it's used, it's where the sound of the E is soft and short. Right? Remember when we said, like if you're using the word bat, you hear the E sound. But then we said when eta is used, the sound of the E is strong and prolonged. And think of the word like that we use, for example, obey. You hear the E sound is strong, but also prolonged. So when we come to Omicron and Omega, the both of these letters are equivalent to the English O, but how it's used it's also different. And so we will cover that when we come to omega. Then we'll talk about the difference in the usage. When do we use omicron and when do we use omega, and what sound does it bring? All right. So the next letter in the alphabet is pi. Again, this is for the mathematicians and the science, the physicists. Remember pi r square? Pi. Some people would say pi. And at least remember this from your school days. The uppercase, think of that straight up, right? So think of like drawing two line like Roman numeral, but then cover the uppercase like that, but nothing on the base. Think of something like that, but then uppercase covered. Of course, this protruding part would not be there. Straight up, and it's starting right there, something like that. That is the uppercase. And the difference in the uppercase and the lowercase is in the size. The uppercase kind of have a small curve, and then just that, something like that. So the difference is in the size, but also in the fact that the uppercase up is the bar on top is straight, short. The lowercase, at least there's a curve right there on the bar on top, curve on the left side. So that is how the pi is written both in the uppercase and in the lowercase. So straight up, straight up, okay? And the lowercase, remember we said there's a small curve on the left side, just smaller, and that is equivalent to the English P. That is pi. I want us to do two more and then we will stop here, and that is rho and sigma. The next letter is rho. Now, rho, you're going to find this and it's probably going to confuse you a little bit because when you find it, it's going to look like letter P. When you find something like this that looks exactly like the English letter P, that is not P at all. That is rho, and it's equivalent to the English letter R. Think of like rat, res, like that word, that letter, the R sound. So what looks like R in the Greek alphabet is actually not R, it is rho, and that rho is equivalent to the English letter R. The lowercase is very similar. The difference in the lowercase is the fact that you start with the base of the rho, and then as you come up, so start with the base, and as you come up you do the curve on top, right? You remember, you notice that? So think of the base first and then the row, just smaller. So the uppercase is completely straight up, and then the curve like you're writing the actual letter P, capital uppercase P in English, that is rho, uppercase. Then the lowercase, this is smoothened, that curve like you're seeing here. All right, so you notice, so here for the uppercase here is straight, and then the curve for the P. The lowercase, the curve up is kind of, is there's a curve up there, it's not straight. That is equivalent to the English letter P. So I mean English letter R. So rho, lowercase, and it's equivalent to the English letter R. Equivalent to the English letter R. All right. Depending on how you write, some people write the R like that, some people write R like that, R like that. So some people write it like that, some people write, then there's like a curve down there. So I don't know how you write your R, but the rho in the English equivalent is equivalent to the R letter. Now, the reason why I'm trying to make sure it's different, slightly different, is because remember gamma, that looks like a Y and it's not. So I want to make sure that this one doesn't look like a Y so that we don't mix it with a Y. So I think that is going to be better, that for our row instead of that, because then that is more gamma lowercase, right? So our last letter, like I said, we're going to do the last one, which is sigma, before we do a review. So sigma is the last letter for today, not in the alphabet, for in this lesson. Sigma. Sigma, the uppercase, is very interesting. It's almost like you're doing a Z, like a zeta, but not quite. So sigma is like this. So it's like you're doing zeta upside down, but not quite. So that is the uppercase sigma. Now the lowercase sigma is written in two ways. Two, at least it has two form, not two ways. It has two form. The first one is, think of like you're writing a balloon, doing a balloon, but then with a string to it. Like if you had a string, right? That is the first one, the way the first one is written. So, but then it's also written just very similar to the English S, but the upper part is more bigger than the lower part, something like that. And so you're going to find both of these U's, of course, equivalent to the English S. So so the difference between the sigma, this form, and the English S is the fact that this part is bigger than the lower part. For the English, this part is similar, balanced in shape with the other one. And so let's write it again. So sigma, also written like that, equivalent to the English S. Okay. Now, this, the way the sigma is used is also different, and I just want to talk about that before we wrap up our lesson for the day. Is so this sigma, when you find it, of course, unless of course, when it's the beginning of a sentence, like a noun, it has a noun and things like that, beginning of a new sentence, they're going to use the uppercase sigma, which is this. But in the middle of the writings, everything else, where everything else is in the lowercase small letter, if the sigma is the first letter and or the letter in the middle of the word before the last letter, they're going to use this one. So this sigma, which is called like the final sigma, it is used only when the last letter in that word is a sigma. So for example, the word apostle, the Greek word apostolos, apostolos, right? So you notice that there are two sigmas in this. So there's a sigma here and there's a sigma at the end. So this is what we're saying. If the sigma appears anywhere from the first letter to before the last letter, they're going to use this sigma. This is what the one we use. Then if the last letter that appears in the word is a sigma, then we use this sigma, what we call the final sigma. So this is how the word apostle appears in the Greek, apostolos. So now hopefully you can tell that apostle, as we use it, that word is not an actual plain English word. It was almost a transliteration from the Greek word apostle, apostolos, and we just have apostle, right? So we will find the uses of the sigma later on in the lessons when we begin looking at the phonemes and morphology, the sounds and the combinations and the blending of the words as we get into the Greek inflections and nouns and vocabularies, especially. But for now, this is our lesson for the day. And just a recap, we have covered lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma. And so let's do all of them. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma. Those are the lessons for today. And a recap, please again for your assignment, just like the we've been doing, your assignment is to practice. Practice is very important. Practice writing the alphabet. Again, our is right from alpha all the way to sigma, where we are. Practice pronouncing. How to pronounce. And at least make sure you're able to write the capital letter and how to write the lower letter, what we call the small letters. All right, and so that in our next lesson we will finish the alphabet, because we are left with 6 more letters in the alphabet, and then we'll be done. And so then we get into the Greek phonology and morphology, the Greek sounds and the way amalgamation and inflection especially happens in the Greek system. All right, so here is our lesson for the day. I hope you've enjoyed so far and that you are actually coming along in your Greek learning very well. Until then, remain your teacher, Jacob Kasule.